The billionaire laughed openly at the desperate mother pleading for help. Seated comfortably at the defense table, Von Blackwell wore his wealth like armor. He believed his lies were flawless, his attorneys unbeatable, and his social status powerful enough to place him beyond the reach of justice. He could not have been more wrong. A sealed envelope rested on the judge's desk. Inside was the evidence that would shatter every illusion of invincibility Vaughn had ever possessed. The fluorescent lights in courtroom 314 of the Cook County Family Court buzzed with a low, oppressive hum. Outside, the brutal Chicago wind battered the thick glass windows. Inside, however, the coldness came entirely from the people gathered beneath them. Maren Holloway sat at the plaintiff's table with her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned bone white. She wore a simple navy dress purchased from a thrift store specifically for the hearing. Although still young, exhaustion had already carved faint lines around her eyes. Maren worked as a freelance graphic designer and waited tables whenever she could, often working punishing shifts to provide for her young son, Micah. Micah was bright, gentle, and endlessly curious. Hai had also been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. The growing medical bills had pushed Maren to the edge of financial collapse. She had not come to court seeking luxury. She had not come for revenge. She had come because her son needed treatment. She had come for survival. Across the aisle sat Von Blackwell. Vaughn was the founder and chief executive of Blackwell Data Systems, a technology logistics empire whose public offering had transformed him into one of the wealthiest men in Chicago. His personal fortune exceeded $800 million. He looked exactly like a man who checked that number every morning. Vaughn wore a custom charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Maren earned in half a year, and he leaned back in his heavy leather chair with complete ease, occasionally glancing at the Rolex on his wrist. His expression reflected nothing more than bored amusement. Beside him sat Dorian Sloan, a partner at one of the most ruthless and expensive family law firms in the Midwest. Within Chicago's legal community, Dorian was known as the Shark of the Loop. He had built his reputation by destroying anyone reckless enough to ask his wealthy clients for money. Maren's attorney could not have been more different. Gideon Mercer was an aging public interest lawyer who worked from a cramped office above a bakery in Wicker Park. The cuffs of his suits were slightly worn, and he habitually adjusted his thick-framed glasses whenever he was thinking. But Gideon had a reputation of his own. He never accepted a case unless he believed in the person asking for his help. And money had never frightened him. "Your Honor," Gideon began. His voice was rough but steady as he addressed the Honorable Judge Celeste Harrow. "We are here to establish paternity and request the child support necessary for Micah Holloway's care." He placed one hand on the table before him. "The plaintiff maintains that Mr. Blackwell is Micah's biological father, following a brief relationship between the parties." Vaughn released a sharp, audible scoff. It was not a cough disguised as laughter. It was deliberate mockery. Judge Harrow looked over her reading glasses and fixed him with a withering stare. "Mr. Blackwell, if you find something amusing, perhaps you would like to share it with the court." Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "My apologies, Your Honor," Vaughn replied smoothly. He did not sound apologetic. "It is simply difficult not to find the audacity of these claims somewhat comical. This is an obvious attempt at extortion." "Keep your opinions to yourself," Judge Harrow snapped. She turned toward the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Brewery, Mr. Mercer, proceed with your evidence." Gideon nodded and approached the bench carrying a thick manila folder. "Your Honor, we are offering Exhibit A. It contains emails and text messages exchanged between my client and Mr. Blackwell. The messages clearly demonstrate that they were romantically involved." Dorian Sloan rose slowly and buttoned his suit jacket. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance and authenticity." He gestured dismissively toward the folder. "Those messages originated from an unregistered prepaid phone. Anyone could have sent them. My client denies ever owning or using such a device." Dorian turned toward Maren. "Furthermore, Ms. Holloway works in digital media. She edits electronic content professionally. Fabricating messages would be effortless for someone with her skills." Heat climbed Maren's neck as humiliation washed over her. "That's a lie," she whispered urgently to Gideon. "You know that's a lie." Gideon rested a reassuring hand on her arm before turning back to the judge. "Your Honor, we also have Exhibit B, a photograph taken at a charity gala held at the Palmer House Hilton." He passed the photograph to the bailiff, who delivered one copy to the judge and another to the defense. "The image clearly shows Mr. Blackwell and Ms. Holloway together." Vaughn barely looked at the photograph. He leaned toward Dorian and whispered something that caused both men to smile. "Your Honor," Dorian said as he stepped away from the defense table, "my client attends countless charity functions. He has been photographed with employees, attendees, business associates, and frankly, opportunistic admirers." Hai held up the photograph. "Look at it. They are merely standing near one another in a crowded ballroom. There is no physical affection and no evidence of intimacy." Dorian turned toward the room. If standing beside Von Blackwell in a photograph were sufficient grounds for a paternity claim, half of Chicago would be waiting outside this courtroom. Vaughn chuckled again. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and stared directly at Maren. His eyes were cold and entirely empty of compassion. He regarded her as though she were nothing more than an insect he intended to crush. Marin's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. She remembered that evening perfectly. She had been hired to design the gala's digital promotional materials. Vaughn had approached her. He had been charming, charismatic, and relentlessly attentive. He swept her into his world, brought her to his penthouse, and briefly made her believe that she mattered to him. When Marin told him she was pregnant, Vaughn handed her an envelope containing $20,000 in cash. He told her to take care of the problem. Then he blocked her number. We also have hotel records, Gideon continued, removing additional documents from the folder. A room was booked through the Blackwell Data Systems corporate account during the period in question. A corporate account used by numerous executives, Dorian countered effortlessly. He spread his hands. Where is the definitive evidence, Mr. Mercer? Where is the proof? His voice became colder. Because all I see is a financially desperate woman who selected a wealthy target, followed his public appearances, and is now attempting an outrageous shakedown to finance her chosen lifestyle. My son has an autoimmune disease. The words burst from Marin before she could stop them. A gasp moved through the courtroom. I do not care about his money for myself, she said, her voice breaking beneath the unbearable pressure inside her chest. Micah needs treatment. He needs his father to accept responsibility. Order! Judge Harrow struck her gavel. Ms. Holloway, you will speak only when addressed. Another interruption, and I will have you removed. She is delivering quite a performance, Your Honor, Vaughn said loudly, his expression filled with false sympathy. It is unfortunate that the boy is ill, truly. He looked at Marin. But it is not my tragedy. Gideon's jaw tightened. Your Honor, given the substantial circumstantial evidence, we request a court-ordered DNA test. Dorian smiled. It was a cold, victorious smile. Actually, Your Honor, we would welcome a DNA test. He paused. But first, we ask that Mr. Blackwell be permitted to testify regarding evidence that will render this entire proceeding meaningless. Judge Harrow frowned, intrigued despite herself. Proceed, Mr. Persson. Vaughn adjusted his silk tie and confidently crossed the courtroom. He entered the witness stand, placed one hand on the Bible, raised the other, and swore to tell the truth. Then he looked over the courtroom like a king observing a mildly entertaining dispute among peasants. Mr. Blackwell, Dorian began, pacing slowly before the empty jury box. Let us resolve the central allegation immediately. He turned toward his client. Did you have a sexual relationship with Marin Holloway? I did not, Vaughn lied. His voice was smooth, calm, and deeply convincing. I met her briefly at the charity gala because she was working as a contractor for the event. We spoke for no more than a few minutes about graphic design. I glanced at Marin. That was the full extent of our interaction. Marin gripped the edge of the wooden table. The ease with which he lied made her physically ill. And yet, Dorian continued with carefully manufactured sorrow, she now claims that you fathered her child. He tilted his head. Why do you believe she selected you, Mr. Blackwell Mundatsum? I am a public figure, Vaughn answered with a weary sigh. My company's success received significant attention. Unfortunately, unstable people sometimes attach themselves to wealthy targets. He looked toward the judge. It is one of the unpleasant realities of my position. I feel sympathy for her, but I refuse to be extorted. Then let us move to the definitive evidence of your innocence, Dorian said. He returned to the defense table and picked up a sleek, blue-bound medical dossier. Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit 1, a certified medical document from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Gideon frowned, put on his glasses, and leaned forward. Mr. Blackwell, Dorian asked, please explain to the court what this document contains. Vaughn looked directly at Marin. Cruel triumph gleamed in his eyes. Before I ever encountered Ms. Holloway, I underwent a bilateral vasectomy. A murmur began spreading through the courtroom. Follow-up testing confirmed that the procedure was entirely successful. His mouth curved into a smile. I am medically sterile. The courtroom erupted. Even Judge Harrow leaned back in surprise. Marin felt the air leave her lungs. The room began to spin. No, she whispered as panic rose in her throat. That is impossible. She turned desperately toward Gideon. He is the only one. Gideon, I swear to you, he is the only man I was with. Gideon raised one hand while studying the medical document the bailiff had delivered. As the court can see, Dorian declared over the growing noise, Dr. Alistair Vance, a respected urologist, signed and certified these records. He faced the judge. Mr. Blackwell is biologically incapable of fathering a child. Dorian's expression hardened. Ms. Holloway's case is not merely dishonest, it is medically impossible. He closed the dossier. We move for immediate dismissal with prejudice. We will also pursue claims for defamation and perjury. Vaughn laughed again. The low, satisfied chuckle cut through the courtroom's silence. I had won. I had completely destroyed her. Vaughn looked toward Marin and gave her the smallest, most arrogant wink. Mr. Brewery. Mr. Mercer, Judge Harrow said. Her tone had shifted into dangerous skepticism. You are holding a certified medical record indicating that the defendant is sterile. She looked toward Marin. Do you have anything to say before I dismiss this case and consider sanctions against your client? Marin buried her face in her hands. It was over. Vaughn had either forged the document or paid a physician to create it, but she had no way to prove either possibility. Micah would lose access to the treatment he needed. The courtroom walls seemed to close around her. But Gideon Mercer did not sit down. I did not apologize. Instead, he calmly adjusted his glasses, removed a single sheet of paper from his briefcase, and walked toward the center of the courtroom. Your Honor, I would like to cross-examine the witness, he said quietly. Dorian rolled his eyes. Objection, this is a complete waste of the court's time. Overruled, Judge Harrow said, although impatience was visible in her expression. Make it brief, Mr. Mercer. It's a did it be brief, Mr. Mercer. Gideon approached the witness stand. I did not appear intimidated. If anything, the aging attorney looked almost amused. Mr. Blackwell, he began in a deceptively mild voice, this is a remarkably impressive medical document. I glanced at the blue folder. Dr. Alistair Vance, very prestigious. Gideon looked up. You maintain that this proves you cannot possibly be Micah Holloway's father. It does not merely suggest it, Mr. Mercer, Vaughn sneered. It proves it. He leaned slightly forward. Unless your client experienced an immaculate conception, I am not the father. I see. Gideon began pacing slowly. Mr. Blackwell, you are a man of extraordinary resources. You operate a vast logistics corporation. You deal with contracts, verification, and due diligence every day, correct? I do, Vaughn replied cautiously. So you understand the consequences of perjury? Gideon stopped. You also understand the consequences of presenting fraudulent evidence to a court of law? Objection, Dorian shouted. Counsel is harassing the witness and implying that my client committed a felony without offering a single piece of proof. I am establishing his understanding of the law, Gideon replied calmly. I will permit it, Judge Harrow said. But reach your point, counselor. I understand the law perfectly, Vaughn declared. His arrogance began to return, and I assure this court that those records are completely authentic. I am pleased to hear you say that. Gideon nodded and turned away from the witness stand. He returned to his table, opened a small locked briefcase, and removed a thick white envelope. A bright red wax seal remained unbroken across the flap. Because, Your Honor, anticipating that the defense might rely heavily upon Mr. Blackwell's alleged medical history, I filed a confidential ex parte motion under the Uniform Parentage Act. Gideon held the envelope high enough for the entire courtroom to see. Vaughn's smile faltered. Only for a moment. But Marin saw it. What is that? Dorian demanded, stepping forward. Mr. Blackwell attended a highly publicized dinner at the Drake Hotel, Gideon explained. His voice echoed through the suddenly silent room. During that event, he drank from a water glass. Vaughn's expression changed. The glass was later collected by a licensed private investigator working under my direction. Gideon continued without hesitation. It was properly bagged, documented, and delivered to an accredited independent forensic laboratory together with a legally obtained DNA sample from Micah Holloway. Every trace of color disappeared from Vaughn's face. His hands closed around the wooden railing of the witness stand so tightly that his knuckles cracked. Objection, Dorian shouted. His composure was vanishing. Illegal search and seizure, chain of custody. Abandoned property in a public location, Gideon countered smoothly. Legally supported under California v. Greenwood and admissible in an Illinois civil paternity proceeding. He looked toward the judge. The complete chain of custody documentation was submitted to the clerk under seal. Judge Harrow leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Vaughn's suddenly pale face. Approach the bench, Mr. Mercer. Bring me the envelope. Gideon walked forward and placed the sealed package in the judge's hands. The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Marin raised her head. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs. She looked toward Vaughn. The billionaire was no longer laughing. The arrogant smile had disappeared. In its place was pure, unmistakable terror. You mocked our evidence, Mr. Blackwell, Gideon said quietly, turning toward the witness stand. You brought a document into this courtroom to protect a lie. His voice hardened. But biology does not care about your fortune. Gideon looked towards the blue medical dossier, and it certainly does not care about a fabricated vasectomy. Judge Harrow picked up a silver letter opener. She slid it beneath the red wax seal. The crisp tearing of the paper sounded like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. The judge unfolded the thick, watermarked laboratory report. No one moved. The room had become so quiet that Marin could hear the ticking of the antique clock mounted on the oak-paneled wall. Judge Harrow's eyes moved down the page. Her expression remained unreadable through one long, torturous moment. Then she raised her head. Her gaze locked onto Vaughn Blackwell with the intensity of a marksman fixing a target. Mr. Sloan, the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, I strongly advise you to tell your client to remain seated. She lowered the report slightly. Because the atmosphere in my courtroom is about to become extremely hostile. Dorian swallowed and stepped away from the bench. Your Honor, he said cautiously. The laboratory findings are conclusive, Judge Harrow announced. Her voice rose to fill the courtroom. The DNA extracted from the water glass used by Vaughn Blackwell matches the DNA of Micah Holloway. Marin stopped breathing. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. The judge looked directly at Vaughn. Mr. Blackwell, you are Micah Holloway's biological father. A broken gasp tore from Marin's chest. She buried her face in her hands as tears of overwhelming relief poured from her eyes. Gideon placed a steady, comforting hand on her trembling shoulder. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. He simply gave her a quiet nod of solidarity. That is a lie, Vaughn roared. He surged to his feet in the witness stand. His expensive suit suddenly seemed restrictive, as though it were closing around him. The controlled billionaire had vanished. In his place stood a frantic, cornered animal. That test was fabricated. He planted the glass. This pathetic ambulance chaser dug through garbage to frame me. Sit down, Mr. Blackwell, Judge Harrow shouted. Her gavel crashed against the block. I demand another test, Vaughn yelled. He pointed a shaking finger at Gideon. This is a conspiracy. I am sterile. I submitted medical proof. Gideon stepped away from Marin's table. He looked at Vaughn with something close to pity. Ah yes, he said, the medical proof. He turned toward the judge. Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to address Defense Exhibit 1, the vasectomy confirmation signed by Dr. Alistair Vance. Judge Harrow's eyes narrowed as she looked toward the blue dossier. Proceed. When the defense disclosed its intended witnesses and exhibits, I investigated Dr. Vance, Gideon explained. He adjusted his glasses. It appears that he is not the distinguished urologist Mr. Blackwell claims him to be. A ripple moved through the gallery. His medical license was permanently revoked by the Illinois State Medical Board after he was found to have issued fraudulent opioid prescriptions. Dorian's face lost what little color remained. He turned toward Vaughn with alarm and betrayal in his eyes. Vaughn, he hissed loudly enough for the front row to hear. What is he talking about? It becomes worse, Mr. Sloan, Gideon continued relentlessly. After losing his medical license, Dr. Vance filed for bankruptcy. He returned to his briefcase and removed another stack of documents. Then, shortly after Ms. Holloway filed this paternity action, a shell corporation registered in Delaware suddenly paid off Dr. Vance's substantial debts. Gideon lifted one page. That payment included a $300,000 mortgage on a residence in Aspen. The courtroom erupted into whispers. I also have the corporate registration records for that Delaware entity. Gideon turned toward Vaughn. The sole managing director is Everett Crane, the chief financial officer of Blackwell Data Systems. The courtroom exploded. Reporters seated near the rear began typing furiously into their phones. Spectators whispered with growing intensity. Objection, Your Honor, Dorian shouted. This is an ambush! But his voice no longer carried its usual authority. Sweat formed across his forehead as he realized that he had submitted a forged document to the court. An ambush, Mr. Harrison? Judge Harrow leaned forward, her face flushed with righteous anger. Your client handed me a fabricated medical report signed by a disgraced, unlicensed physician whose debts were paid with corporate hush money. Her voice rose. And you have the audacity to suggest that you are the victim of an ambush? I did not know, Dorian said quickly. He raised both hands defensively. Your Honor, I swear to you as an officer of the court, my firm received that document directly from Mr. Blackwell. We believed it was authentic. You incompetent fool, Vaughn snapped at his own attorney. He turned back toward the judge, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Fine, you want money? His voice cracked with fury. I will write a check now. How much? 2 million? 5 million? Vaughn spread his arms. Give me a number and I will purchase this entire pathetic circus. Mr. Blackwell, you cannot purchase your way out of perjury, Judge Harrow said. Her voice dropped into a glacial chill. You cannot purchase your way out of defrauding a court of law. Her eyes burned into him. And you certainly cannot purchase your way out of your responsibility to a sick child whom you abandoned and then attempted to erase. Vaughn scoffed. His arrogance returned in one final, desperate surge. I am the chief executive of a publicly traded corporation. He looked around the courtroom with contempt. You believe you can touch me? He struck the witness railing with one hand. I have an army of attorneys. I will bury this court in appeals until that child dies of old age. The cruelty of the statement remained suspended in the air. Everyone who heard it seemed sickened. Marin began to cry again. But not because she was afraid. She cried because she finally understood the full nature of the man standing before her. And because Micah would never have to know him as a father. Judge Harrow's face hardened into stone. We will see about that. She turned toward the rear of the courtroom. Bailiff, take Mr. Blackwell into custody. 2 armed court officers immediately stepped forward. Vaughn's eyes widened in genuine shock. Wait, what? He backed away inside the witness stand. You cannot arrest me. On what charge? Contempt of court to begin with, Judge Harrow said. Perjury and the presentation of fraudulent evidence. She gathered the documents before her. I will also forward the entire transcript, along with Mr. Mercer's financial evidence, to the Cook County District Attorney for criminal investigation into the bribery of a former medical professional. The officer seized Vaughn by the arms. For the first time in his privileged and protected life, Vaughn Blackwell looked completely helpless. Get your hands off me! He struggled violently as steel handcuffs closed around the wrists of his custom-tailored suit. Do you know who I am? Vaughn twisted toward his attorney. Sloan, do something! Dorian hurriedly packed his briefcase without meeting his client's eyes. I am formally withdrawing as your counsel, Mr. Blackwell, he said coldly. My firm will not participate in criminal fraud. The officers marched Vaughn down the center aisle. He shouted threats and obscenities while Judge Harrow repeatedly struck her gavel to restore order. The heavy wooden doors closed behind him, silencing his screams. A profound, cleansing quiet descended over the courtroom. Judge Harrow took a slow breath and regained her composure. Then she looked down at Marin. The severity in the judge's eyes softened into deep compassion. "Ms. Holloway," she said gently, "I apologize for what you were forced to endure." Marin wiped her face and rose on shaking legs. "The justice system is often blind," Judge Harrow continued. "But because of your attorney's exceptional work, it has seen clearly today." "Thank you, Your Honor," Marin whispered. "Thank you so much." "Do not thank me yet." Judge Harrow picked up her pen. "I am ruling entirely in favor of the plaintiff." Marin gripped the table. "Paternity is officially established." The judge continued writing. "Given the defendant's extraordinary wealth and outrageous misconduct, I am ordering the maximum retroactive child support permitted, calculated from Micah's birth." Gideon quickly estimated the amount. It was staggering. Furthermore, Mr. Blackwell will establish an irrevocable medical trust in the amount of $5 million for Micah Holloway. Judge Harrow looked toward Marin. "The trust must be fully funded and will ensure that this child receives every treatment his physicians consider necessary." Marin covered her mouth as fresh tears filled her eyes. "Finally, the defendant will pay all legal expenses incurred by the plaintiff, multiplied threefold as a punitive sanction for his fraudulent delays and abuse of the judicial process." Marin turned toward Gideon and threw her arms around him. The old lawyer chuckled softly and patted her back. "We got him, Marin," he whispered. His voice was warm and reassuring. "Micah is going to be all right." News of the courtroom confrontation soon reached the press. The revelation that the celebrated chief executive of Blackwell Data Systems had forged medical evidence to avoid supporting his sick child sent shockwaves through the financial world. The company's board of directors, terrified by the public outrage and approaching criminal prosecution, voted unanimously to remove Vaughn from his position. The company's stock collapsed, cutting away a massive portion of his fortune. Facing felony charges involving fraud and perjury, Vaughn was eventually forced to accept a plea agreement that included severe financial penalties, extended probation, and the permanent destruction of his reputation. High became an outcast within the Chicago society he had once dominated. Marin's life changed completely. The medical trust allowed Micah to receive advanced treatment from leading pediatric specialists across the country. As his condition stabilized, the healthy color slowly returned to his cheeks. The limitless energy of childhood returned to his steps. Marin purchased a comfortable, sun-filled home in the suburbs. She no longer needed to endure exhausting double shifts. Instead, she devoted herself to expanding her design business and caring for her son. Gideon Mercer, the humble public interest attorney from Wicker Park, became a legend within the legal community. Wealthy clients arrived offering enormous retainers, hoping to secure the services of the man who had brought down Vaughn Blackwell. But Gideon remained in his cramped office above the bakery. He continued representing people who desperately needed protection from those who believed themselves untouchable. Money and power can purchase many things. They can purchase silence. They can purchase fear. They can even purchase the illusion of invincibility. But Vaughn Blackwell learned that when a desperate mother's love is armed with undeniable truth, no fortune in the world can prevent the gavel from falling. Did you enjoy this courtroom drama? The truth may take time to emerge, but justice always deserves the final word. If you enjoyed seeing this arrogant billionaire receive exactly what he deserved, press the like button. Share this remarkable story with friends and family who appreciate a satisfying twist. And subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of justice, karma, and redemption.